Well, good morning and welcome to another week on my allotment. Sunday morning, bitterly cold out there. Actually, the still air temperature is about +3, so there's no frozen ground or anything, but it's the wind. I saw one newspaper that called it the Beast from the East 2, which is your typical over-dramatic newspaper headline. Although I have to say, you know, it's an easterly wind that's blowing and it is bitter. My nose is running. And when I get here in the morning, I scoop out all the ash from the previous visit. And because it's only a small aperture to get my hand in, I get soot all over my hands. And then, being a typical fella, you know, I wipe my face and do all sorts of unpleasant things. And not very often when I get home, I've got black marks all over me mush. And I realise I've been videoing. So I apologise for previous behaviour and any in the future if I'm sat here with soot on my face. Anyway, slightly different this morning. Cheryl and I have got into what we call our lockdown routine, and it goes back to when Charlotte was staying with us last spring, nearly a year ago now. And that was that Saturday we always went for a walk. As a family, we did something together. And then Sunday, I got to come up here, and the girls, well, I don't know what they did because there was nothing open. But anyway, this was my day, and it's continued that way. And we did that this weekend. We went out for a nice walk yesterday. It was a lovely day, about 7-8 degrees C, so nothing like it is today. Very pleasant. And first thing in the morning, I've got used to Cheryl doing something nice for breakfast. And of course, because we don't eat meat and we avoid dairy as very much as possible, that can be a challenge sometimes. And she did a full cooked breakfast yesterday. I was really surprised. It was lovely, absolutely lovely. And of course, we have vegan sausages, and then everything is hash browns, mushrooms, tomatoes, beans. Absolutely lovely. But there's some leftovers, so I've brought them up here with a pan, and I'm going to have a sausage and mushroom sandwich. And I'm really looking forward to it. So, and I'm very used to cooking on this Frontier stove, because before this was used in this shed on the allotment, its first and primary role was for my canoeing trips. And of course, when I go canoeing, if I go on my own or with family and friends, I tend to do the cooking, which is a bit frightening. Anyway, yeah, I'm very used to doing this. So I'm going to crack on now and have a lovely hearty breakfast. And then I'll talk about what's happening on the plot. Coconut oil, I think. Well, I wish you could smell that. It's quite remarkable. There's no meat involved, and yet it doesn't half smell like it. Fantastic. The shed is now nice and warm, although it's bitterly cold and blowing outside. It's fantastic. Absolute home from home. Well, I thought I'd save myself the indignity of eating my sausage and mushroom sandwich in front of you, but I'm here to report it was blooming delicious. I've not done that in the shed before, so well worth the effort. Very nice. Anyway, to more important matters. What am I doing at the moment? Well, again, pretty much as last week, the main effort is at home. And what I do is I've got a sort of a potting tray in my shed, and I unload my compost bags, generally just a general compost, multi-purpose, and I put it into this tray, and from there I put my little seed trays in and I fill it, and that's where I do my potting. Well, what I'm doing at the moment is I fill the seed tray of whichever description, and then I bring it indoors and I put a little cardboard tray underneath that in case there's any debris falls out and angers my wife, which I can't afford to do. If you're a man living with another woman, you'll know that. And I leave it in the house for 2, 3, 4 days and let the soil warm up. And then I sow whatever it is I'm sowing. And I think I've said before, so far I've sowed more. I've got more broad beans. I've got leeks, sweet peas and tomatoes. And when I go home today, I'm going to move another tray indoors, leave it for 3 or 4 days, and I'm going to sow some lettuce and some spinach, the New Zealand spinach that I grew last year, which was a very good crop. So that's really the main effort. Here on the plot, it tends to be the structural stuff. It's no good. Through the winter, I've tried with my bent fork rake to keep agitating the surface of the soil because it keeps it crumbly and it allows the water to move through. But we've had so much rain, it's easily as bad as last year. That I just, it's just pointless. There's been a lot of surface water. I haven't had any what I would call flooding, but I've certainly had a lot of surface water. So I've had to give up on that. So there's been a lot of structural work going on, and of course a big effort with the water butts. And when I got here this morning, I had a lovely note from my friend John, 2, 3 plots down, and he's got a farmer friend very close by, 2 or 3 minutes drive away. And he got in touch with him this week to find out if he had any of these barrels spare, and apparently he has. So it's now a matter this week of John and I getting together on the plot, driving down in my van and picking up these barrels. So a public thank you to John, although he doesn't watch these. He's not really an internet guy. So, I can collect more water. But as I sit here now, if I think about it, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I've got 9, 10. I've got 10 45-gallon oil drum size water butts, and they're all full, or nearly. So, I'm doing all right with that. What are they, about 200 litres each? So, that's 10,000, 2,000 litres of water sitting here on the plot. But I can always use more. So that's where the main effort is, really, is peripheral to the actual beds, because nothing's going in this ground for quite some time yet. So yeah, the main effort is off the plot, and today I've got a small flower trough. I'm going to put some rotted manure in it. I think I'll transfer a bit more manure into my compost bays, because inevitably come the spring more people will start, assume people will start to come back to their plots, and that will get raided. So I'm up here all the time, as they say, first up best dressed. I don't want to pinch it all, it's only fair that everybody gets a fair cut of it, but it's been there a year now, so people have had ample opportunity. So fortune favours the brave, as they say, and I try to avoid cliches like the plague. Anyway, I thought I'd tell you a little story. Excuse me while I blow my nose. Yeah, a little story about my past. And this story goes back to 1984. When I left home at 16 and got the train from Kent, and I came across here to South Wales, and I went to the Army Apprentice College, which was for Royal Engineers, and we were boy soldiers. We weren't in the regulars because we weren't 18, and I did a 2-year apprenticeship. And when I finished that, we all got to select which units we wanted to go to, and as much as they could, they gave us our first choices, and mine was to go to the Royal Engineer Commandos. And I got that choice, as a number of us did. So off we went in January 82 to do our adult basic training. And from there, me and a few of us went down to Plymouth to do the commando training. Well, of course, history now tells us that at the same time, the scrap metal merchants from Argentina were landing on South Georgia, and off went the Falklands War. And it's no good having regrets in life. It doesn't serve any purpose, I don't think. But if I had a regret, it would be that I missed the Falklands War. Some of my friends, they went to the Paras at the same time as I went to the Commandos. And the difference with the Paras was you got your berries straight away, and you did the wings course, you know, the jumps, as and when you could fit the course in. Whereas with the Commandos, you didn't get the berry, so you weren't a commando until you completed the commando course, which was 3 or 4 months long. And hell on earth. So we were doing the commando course whilst the Falklands War was on. And of course, I regret not going, but that regret is very much tempered by the fact that it was a war. And I know of at least one boy who I went to Beachley, the Army Apprentice College with, who died, who he was lucky enough to go, and unfortunately a young man called Wayne Tarbard, he was killed on Sir Galahad, and I cannot imagine how terrible that death was. So whilst I regret not going to the Falklands War, you know, you have to be careful what you wish for in life, don't you? And I think about Wayne Tarbard all the time. However, that's not the story. The story is that after the Falklands War in 1982, I was now a commando, I passed the course, and in 1984 the commando squadron was sent back to the Falklands to do construction on the airfield and other tasks and mine clearance and all sorts of different things. Anyway, while we were there, we were staying on these large ships that were moored in the Falklands in Stanley Bay. We called them coastels. They had been used previously as prison ships. I don't know where. I did see them later in Weymouth Harbour many years later. But they were adequate. They were 4-man rooms, tiny little rooms. I reckon the 4-man rooms were only a little bit bigger than this shed. You couldn't all move around. There was no space. The majority of the space was taken up with the 2 bunk beds either side, with a narrow strip in the middle, and then an ensuite bathroom, which is a bit posh. Anyway, they were perfectly adequate. They had a bar, they had a gym. They did us, and they were heated. So, Anyway, while we were there, they have a thing called the CSE show, Combined Services Entertainment. And this year was a guy called Jim Davidson. Now, if you're British, you know who Jim Davidson is. But if you're not, Jim Davidson, back in the 70s and the 80s, was probably Britain's leading comedian. He did a number of top television shows, and he was at the top of his game. He went out of favour later on in the sort of 90s because of political correctness. He told a lot. It was a bit like Bernard Manning. He told a lot of jokes that today are considered inappropriate because we've lost our ability to laugh at ourselves. Well, that's my opinion. But yeah, back in the day, he was a top comedian. And for whatever reason, personal reason, he was a big fan of the forces. And he came down in 1984 to do some shows. He came down, obviously Jim Davidson. He brought with him Tommy Vance. Oh, there was he brought some dancing girls, a troupe of dancing girls. And there was a fella, and his name escapes me now, it's not important, but he was another comedian / guitar songwriter. Anyway, it was a superb show, and he gave it on the coastels to the hundreds, if not thousands, of troops that were boarded on. There were 2 coastels, so he did 2 shows. And what he did, he said to whoever was liaison with him, I want to give my show to every soldier, airman, sailor, on the Falklands. So wherever there are servicemen and women, I'm going to do the show, however grim and austere the conditions. So we watched this show. He did the coastels first, and because they actually built stages in the gymnasiums, and then he went off on a helicopter all around the Falklands. Anyway, we saw the show, thought no more of it, and then on the 6-month tour, we had I think 4 days off in the middle of it, called R&R, Rest and Recuperation. Well, of course, you couldn't go anywhere, so mostly blokes just went back to their rooms and slept, because we were working hard. But I got together with a group of REME lads, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, or as they're more commonly known, Royal Engineers Made Easy. That's for you, Dad. And what we did is we booked a helicopter trip out to San Carlos, and we followed the route that the troops took during the war. And we slept in farmers' barns. You know, the locals couldn't do enough for us, obviously, especially as these boys I was doing it with were here in '82 and, you know, risked their lives to free these people. So we slept in their barns and outbuildings, wherever they could put us up. And over 4 days, we did the 100-odd miles tab back to Port Stanley. Anyway, the last night, I know this is a long rambling story, I will get there. The last night we stopped on the hills overlooking Port Stanley. I think it was Tumbledown. It might have been Two Sisters, I can't remember. But on this hill, we didn't know till we got there, was a rebro. And a rebro is a rebroadcasting station. Essentially, back then, when we didn't have satellites, etc., radio signals had to be rebroadcast up to a mast on a hill because they didn't have line of sight over the mountains, and then beyond across. So on top of this mountain were 2 shipping containers. And in one shipping container slept 3 or 4 Royal Signals operators. And in the other one was all their radio equipment. So we got up there and we introduced ourselves. And in a place like that, where the conditions are hazardous and dangerous, there's a different kind of atmosphere. You know, you'll find that in Alaska, in the north of Scotland, these places where people are more friendly and more helpful. And we said to these guys, you know, it's only where we can kit, because we're not going to make Stanley. We're going to go down into Stanley tomorrow. And they said, yeah, you can sleep on the floor in our shipping container where our bunk beds are. And they were wire, typical army bunk beds, but they didn't have mattresses. I don't know why, you know, but that was the way the army treated you. They just had the wire, and they put their sleeping bags on them. Anyway, we were going to sleep on the floor. And we were having a chat with a couple of guys who weren't manning the radios, and this helicopter came in. I mean, you know, what's that? Are you getting a resupply of food? He said, no, we've just had a resupply of food. Anyway, it was Jim Davidson and his little troop. Anyway, they got off this, you know, we went out to have a look, and they got off this helicopter. Well, you can imagine what they looked like, because, you know, on stage, these dancing girls looked unbelievably attractive. When they got off this helicopter, in all the army gear they'd been given, you know, big hats pulled down and massive coats, they were frozen. They didn't look that exotic then. Anyway, they rushed inside one of the shipping containers where we were, and the helicopter took off. And, you know, Jim introduced himself and his little troop, and they said, we're here to do the show for you. And he signals, look, and says, well, where are you going to do the show? He says, well, can we move the bunk beds out? Because they didn't have mattresses, they could put the bunk beds outside and empty their accommodation shipping container. And they did the show at the end of the container, and we all sat at the other end. Now, of course, the 5 or 6 of us that were doing the yomp, we'd already seen the show, but that didn't matter. He was going to do this show for these 4 signalmen, and that was it. He wasn't going to be stopped. So that's what they did. And of course, we'd heard the jokes before, but you know, you could laugh at a joke twice. So Jim Davidson got up. Richard Digance was the other chap, the guy who did the funny songs with the guitar. Richard Digance. And Tommy Vance, I don't really know why Tommy Vance was there, but he introduced the show. He was the compere, if you like. So Richard Digance and Jim Davidson did their little bit. You know, I could have reached out and touched him. It was quite funny. Then the dancing, and I think there's about 7 or 8 dancing girls, but they couldn't all get in the end of the ISO to do their sort of, you know, that's my impression of dancing girls. So just, you know, half of them got up, got down to their leotards and army boots, and these barely clad, beautiful girls did their bit in the end of the ISO. It was the most surreal evening of my life, and it was a little moment of magic. And here we are, what is it, 1982 to now. Well, it's 40 years later, nearly 40 years later, and I still remember it as if it was yesterday. Yeah, it was a wonderful moment, and I would say years later I was in the Oman, and Jerry Halliwell of Spice Girls fame came out to do the same CSE show type thing. And you know, she had so many bodyguards around her, no one could get near her. You couldn't get an autograph, she wouldn't give autographs. She did a show to thousands of troops in the desert, but she wouldn't talk to the soldiers. She didn't want to come near soldiers. She was clearly worried about PR, and it was all, she had a camera crew with her, and she did a walk along a beach. I remember seeing her on a beach, and a couple of soldiers tried to get near her for autographs or just to say hello, and they were escorted away. Yeah, how different Jim Davidson. And you know, he went out of favour and he had a troubled personal life, and of course he's still around. I've watched him a few times on YouTube. But let me say, however troubled his life and how out of favour he is with the general public, to all servicemen and women, the man is an absolute legend. I won't go on about it, but you can see why I'm saying that, because he was giving that show. He gave it in cow barns, he gave it in sheds, he gave it in little village halls out at these settlements. Everywhere there was a serviceman, he went and he did that show. And don't forget, if we hadn't been there, he'd have been doing that show to 4 blokes. The man is an absolute star. Anyway, I hope you find that mildly interesting, and I apologise for it taking so long. Well, I'd like to introduce you to a couple of new additions to the plot. And this little path is something I created this week out of some excess bricks, because, you know, I park in the golf car park because it's shut at the moment, and Cheryl parks here when she comes to visit, and Les, the owner, is happy with that, and it just prevents Cheryl from getting her shoes dirty when she walks onto the plot. Got to look after number one. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Coming across the Hanley Bridge over the Hanley Canal. And this week, it was Bridget actually. Bridget told me that B&M, which is a shop I wouldn't ordinarily go in, was selling off fruit trees 2 for a tenner. So I went down there, and sure enough, although there was a sign on the garden centre bit saying because of restrictions you're not allowed in there, the doors opened, I went in, and a member of staff said it was okay. So I got myself a Granny Smith and one called Jonah Gold, and I bought that based off that picture because I thought red apples look nice. What other reason would you buy an apple tree? And yeah, they're both in. I've got some metal bands there off an old wooden barrel that somebody had as a planter that have fallen apart, so they just keep the good soil in and neat and tidy. So yeah, very pleased with my purchase, and if they don't take and they don't grow, well, I've lost a tenner. And I'm now up to 4 barrels. Those 4 barrels have virtually been filled off of this one side of the shed. Only I had enough barrels on this side. However, of course, and I'm hoping that John's friend, the farmer, is going to be able to furnish me with more. But actually on this side of the shed, I've got these 2 water butts here, and I decant some of it into that small butt there. And then coming off my other shed, the original shed on the plot, I've got these 2 large drums filling off this old shed. And I'm just going to explain to you now what that grey drum's got in it. Well, here's the remains of our vast manure dump, and of course this manure slowly leaches out of it liquid. And what I've done, I've put this plank to get across the soft mud. I dug a hole that's about 1 foot cubed, so it goes down about 1 foot, and over a day or 2 it fills like a sump with the drain water off this manure, and you can see that dark rich colour. That has got to be full of goodness in my estimation. So what I do is I scoop it out of there, and so far I've filled that drum. Now, because there's a brisk breeze blowing, I can't smell it, but ordinarily that's chucking up a bit. But that doesn't matter. And I will use that as a feed. Dilute it in each can, and hopefully that will feed the soil and the plants. Sounds like a plan. Right, well, it's that time of the programme. I think programme might be slightly too posh for this, but I'm now going to talk a little bit, about a minute's worth, don't worry, about the next vegetable on my plot. Last time I did, try and straighten these up, last time I did the broad bean. Today it's the French bean. So the French bean has several other names, such as the green bean, the Kenyan bean, the common bean, the kidney, the flageolet and the haricot bean. I've not heard of half of those, and they're all the same thing. They have been cultivated for over 7,000 years. First by the Indian tribes in the Tehucan Valley in Mexico. I'll probably pronounce that wrong. Is that something like Tijuana? I don't know. Tehucan. And in Peru. Christopher Columbus brought them back to Europe from his second voyage to the New World in 1493. Did you know? Unlike fruits that become sweeter the longer they stay on the tree or bush, beans are sweetest when young. It's a bit like people, really, isn't it? They are best consumed fresh, young, green and sweet. If left on the vine, beans wither and the seeds dry and harden. Well, I think I knew that you know, it's one of those crops you pick when they're just a little bit what you think is too small. That's the time to pick them. French bean health claims. As well as being packed full of fibre, vitamins including folic acid and minerals, claims have suggested that French beans could help reduce the risk of diabetes, heart disease and colon cancer. They are low in calories and contain no cholesterol, but have very high levels of flavonoids, that's antioxidants that have anti-inflammatory properties, which may help to prevent blood clots in veins and arteries. Well, there you go. I think that's one of the, I'm not sure that's specific to French beans actually. I mean, if you think, you know, cholesterol, there is no cholesterol in fruits and vegetables. Cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, is only to be found in animal products. And the big issue, I think, for the Western world is fibre. I think it's about 1% of the population get their daily recommended total of fibre. And again, fibre is only found in fruits and vegetables particularly. Which is why, you know, we are, our intestines, our stomachs, our digestive system has evolved to digest fibre. Fibre promotes digestion. It is the most healthy thing to eat. And of course, again, animal products contain no fibre. So I'm not sure any of that is unique to French beans. However, interesting nevertheless. Well, we've got a brief moment of sunshine. It's turning into a pleasant day. And yeah, the gooseberries wasn't a job I planned on doing, but having a wander around the plot with a cup of tea, I noticed the bed that the gooseberries were in is always waterlogged. You know, you put your foot on it and the water just oozes out. So It's the one with the blackcurrant bushes in. For some reason, the blackcurrant bushes, which have been there since I got the plot 4 or 5 years ago, they don't seem to mind the water so much. But the gooseberry, I've lost a few gooseberry bushes in that bed. So I bit the bullet and I've moved them all to this top corner bed next to the pond, which is the highest bed I have on my plot. And consequently, it doesn't get waterlogged. It's about the only one that doesn't, actually. And I hope that, you know, apart from moving them in this cold weather, I'm sure that, you know, I left most of the soil on the root ball. They should be fine, because I do love my gooseberries, and we were lucky. We got no gooseberries at all off my bushes last year because of the flooding. But Betty and her friend, I think it's Linda, they brought me a whacking great bag of gooseberries, and actually by coincidence today we're having the last of them in a crumble for tea. Thank you, Betty. So yeah, it's a job well done. I'm glad I've done that, and that'll just be a dedicated gooseberry bed, because we love our fruit as much as our vegetables. And Cheryl's not that keen, but I do love gooseberries, so I hope it succeeds. We shall see. Well, it's not a bad day. I'm going to finish up here now, and the fire's just starting to dampen down, and I'll make my way home. But I've had a good day. I've had a good day. I didn't set the alarm this morning, and the forecast was for a little bit of snow or maybe a snow flurry today, but that hasn't materialised. And actually, this afternoon's been quite pleasant. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for those who've subscribed, and I do welcome and enjoy all the comments. Occasionally I get a negative one, as is your right, to steer me back online. But I've had some lovely advice, really helpful advice from people who know more than I do, and lots of words of encouragement. So please keep the comments coming. I enjoy every one of them, and I reply to every one of them, I hope. So yeah, I've had a good day. I filled that, sat down there, the little flower trough, ready for my marigolds, and I shall be planting all my marigolds with one eye on where my legumes are and avoiding the two coming together. So I've learned something from that Kitchen Garden magazine. That's valuable. I've moved all my gooseberry bushes, as small as they are. I did have a whole set of gooseberry bushes, and like I said earlier, they were in that bed with the blackcurrant bushes, and over the 3 or 4 years I've been here, they've all died, and I suspect it is due to the waterlogging through the winter. So I hope by moving them and giving them a light prune that they'll do better there. So that's time well spent. So thank you for joining me. It is difficult to create content at this time of year, so I hope you don't mind my ramblings about my past. I just figure, you know, some of it's mildly interesting, and you know, it fills a video. So thanks for joining me. I'm hoping the next video I do will include a review of my compost that I bought and is in the garden. I think I started to fill it on the 29th of October. So that, and it says it can turn garden waste into compost in 3 months. So it's been 3 months now. It's the Aero hot bin. So I shall do a review of that hopefully, and that'll be in the next one. So thanks for joining me. Like I say, look after yourselves. We're nearly into spring. We're nearly there. It's been a long, old, miserable winter. But we've got everything ahead of us to look forward to in so many different ways. So all being well, I shall see you next week. Look after yourselves, and bye for now.